Zaxthel had never understood the concept of fear until he watched the small human child stumble and scrape her knee on the rough concrete. The child's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she called for her mother with a voice that seemed to shake the very foundations of his understanding. He stood frozen in the shadows of the abandoned building, his crystalline exoskeleton catching fragments of the dying sunlight. For 300 cycles he had walked through battlefields where warriors 10 times his size had fallen before his blade. He had stared into the void of space without protection, felt the cold vacuum try to claim his life, and never once had his heart skipped a beat. The Kethran were born without the neural pathways for fear. It was bred out of them millennia ago, when their ancestors decided that courage was not the absence of fear, but the complete inability to feel it. But this tiny human, barely reaching his lower thorax, had just demonstrated something that made his entire worldview crumble like ancient stone. The child's mother rushed over, her face painted with an emotion Zaxthel had seen countless times in battle but never truly comprehended. The woman's hands shook as she examined the small wound, her breathing rapid and shallow. She was terrified. Not of death, not of cosmic horrors or weapons of mass destruction, but of her offspring's minor injury. "It's okay, sweetheart," the mother whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt at calm. "Mommy's here. Let me clean this up." Zaxthel watched, transfixed, as the woman pulled a small cloth from her bag and gently dabbed at the scrape. The child winced, fresh tears flowing, but she didn't pull away. She trusted her mother completely, even while experiencing pain and distress. This was impossible. The Kethran databases contained extensive files on human physiology and psychology. Humans were classified as a primitive species, driven by irrational emotions that made them weak and unpredictable. Fear was listed as one of their greatest handicaps, a vestigial response that served no purpose in modern civilization. Yet as Zaxthel observed this simple interaction, he began to see something the databases had missed entirely. The mother's fear wasn't weakness. It was the driving force behind her incredible gentleness, her careful attention to detail, her willingness to drop everything else in the universe to tend to one small scrape on one small knee. The child's tears weren't signs of fragility, but of trust so complete that she allowed herself to be vulnerable, knowing she would be protected and comforted. His communication device buzzed against his armored chest. Commander Vakhthar's voice crackled through the speaker, cold and efficient as always. "Zaxthel, report your status." The human settlement should have been neutralized by now. He looked down at the device, then back at the mother and child. The woman was now applying a colorful bandage to the wound, decorated with images of small animals. The child had stopped crying and was actually giggling at the cartoon creatures on her knee. "The settlement is more complex than anticipated, Commander," he replied, surprising himself with the words. "Explain." Zaxthel watched as other humans began to emerge from the surrounding buildings. They had clearly been hiding, waiting to see if he was a threat. Now they approached cautiously, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and protective instinct he had witnessed in the mother. An elderly human male limped forward, his body bearing scars from what looked like decades of hard labor and conflict. His eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, yet still chose to place himself between potential danger and his community. "You're one of those Kethran warriors, aren't you?" the old man asked, his voice steady despite the obvious fear in his posture. Zaxthel could have ended the man's life with a single gesture. The human had to know this, yet he stood his ground. "I am," Zaxthel replied, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into human speech. "You here to kill us?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. There was no pleading, no begging for mercy, just a simple request for information, asked by someone who was clearly terrified but refused to show weakness in front of his people. "That was the mission parameters," Zaxthel admitted. The old man nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. Around him, other humans tensed, but none of them ran. Parents pulled their children closer, but they didn't flee. Young adults moved to form a protective circle around the elderly and wounded, but they didn't attack. They were afraid. Zaxthel could see it in every line of their bodies, hear it in their elevated breathing, smell it in the pheromones they unconsciously released. But their fear wasn't controlling them. Instead, it was transforming them into something he had never encountered in all his cycles of warfare. Their fear was making them brave. "Well," the old man said, adjusting his stance despite his obvious leg injury, "if you're going to do it, you should know that we won't go quietly. Not because we think we can win, but because the people we love deserve to see that someone fought for them." Zaxthel felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation he had no name for. His weapon remained holstered, his hands steady, but his mind was racing. Through calculations and scenarios that had nothing to do with tactics or military objectives, these humans were showing him something that 3 centuries of Kethran training had never taught him. They were demonstrating that fear wasn't the absence of courage, but the very foundation upon which true bravery was built, and in that moment, staring into the eyes of beings who were prepared to die to protect each other despite being absolutely terrified, Zaxthel began to understand that perhaps the Kethran had removed something far more important than they had ever realized. The silence stretched between Zaxthel and the human settlement for several heartbeats. His communication device buzzed again, more insistently this time. Commander Vokter S.'s voice carried the sharp edge of impatience that preceded punishment details. "Zaxthel, you will respond immediately or face court-martial for insubordination." Without breaking eye contact with the elderly human, Zaxthel reached down and switched off his communicator. The action sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered humans. They had clearly expected either immediate violence or his departure. "Why?" the old man asked, his weathered face creasing with confusion. Zaxthel looked around at the faces surrounding him. Each one told a story written in scars, worry lines, and eyes that had seen too much hardship. These weren't the primitive savages described in Kethran intelligence reports. These were beings who had chosen to build something together despite the universe's apparent determination to tear it apart. "Because I want to understand something," Zaxthel replied, lowering himself into a sitting position that made him less physically imposing. The gesture was instinctive, though he couldn't explain where the instinct had come from. A woman with graying hair and gentle eyes stepped forward. She wore simple clothes stained with what looked like medicinal herbs and soil from farming work. "Understand what, exactly?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from being listened to, not feared. "You are all afraid?" Zaxthel observed. "Your elevated heart rates, increased respiratory function, stress hormones in your perspiration. Every biological indicator confirms it. Yet you remain here, prepared to fight an enemy you cannot defeat." The woman nodded slowly. "And this confuses you?" "My species eliminated fear from our genetics 3,000 years ago. We were told it was evolution. That fear made beings weak, irrational, prone to mistakes that could cost lives in battle." A younger man, perhaps in his 30s with calloused hands that spoke of manual labor, laughed bitterly. "Well, they weren't wrong about the making mistakes part. Fear makes you do stupid things sometimes." "Then why do you not remove it?" Zaxthel asked. "Surely your medical technology could accomplish what ours did." The question seemed to puzzle the humans. They exchanged glances, having a conversation with micro-expressions that Zaxthel found himself studying intently. The woman with the medical supplies spoke first. "Because fear keeps us alive. It tells us when something is dangerous, when we need to be careful, when we need to protect the people we love." "But more than that," the elderly man added, settling onto a nearby crate with obvious relief for his injured leg. "Fear is what makes courage mean something. Anyone can walk into danger if they're too stupid or too modified to understand the risk. But choosing to face something that terrifies you? That's different." Zaxthel processed this information, comparing it against everything he had been taught. The Kethran view courage as the absence of fear. "Then the Kethran don't understand courage," said a voice from the crowd. A teenage girl stepped forward, her arm in a makeshift sling. "My mom died protecting this settlement from raiders last year. She was scared the whole time. I watched her hands shake as she loaded her rifle. But she stayed at her post because she knew we were counting on her. The girl's eyes filled with moisture, but her voice remained steady. If she hadn't been afraid, her sacrifice wouldn't have meant anything. It would have just been, I don't know, like a machine following programming. Zaxthil felt that strange sensation in his chest again, stronger this time. He watched the way the other humans looked at the girl, their faces soft with shared grief and pride. This was another emotion his species had eliminated, deeming it inefficient. "You mourn your dead," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Every day," the medical woman replied. "We carry them with us. Their voices in our heads, their love in our hearts, their hope in our actions. Does this not cause dysfunction? Reduce efficiency?" The young man with calloused hands knelt down and picked up a small toy that had been dropped during the initial panic. He turned it over in his hands, his expression distant. "This belonged to my nephew. Raiders took him 2 months ago." He looked up at Zaxthil with eyes that held depths of pain the Kethran warrior couldn't fathom. "The grief almost broke me. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Other days I was so angry I wanted to hunt down every raider in the sector." "That sounds highly dysfunctional," Zaxthil observed. "Maybe, but that same grief is why I work 16 hours a day building better defenses for this place. It's why I volunteer for the dangerous scouting missions. It's why I'm standing here right now instead of running away." The man's voice grew stronger with each word. "My nephew's death meant something because I refused to let anyone else suffer the way he did." Zaxthil looked around the settlement with new eyes. What he had initially catalogued as inefficient human architecture he now realized was something else entirely. The buildings were arranged not for optimal defensive positioning, but to create communal spaces where people could gather, where children could play safely, where the elderly could sit in the shade and watch their community thrive. Every structure told a story of compromise between practical needs and emotional requirements. Gardens grew in spaces that could have been weapons emplacements. Art decorated walls that could have been left bare for easier maintenance. Music drifted from windows, where silence would have been more tactically sound. These humans had built their settlement not just as a place to survive, but as a place worth living in, worth dying for. "Your fear makes you stronger," he said, and the words felt strange in his mouth. "Not stronger," the elderly man corrected. "More human. Fear, love, grief, hope, all those messy emotions you've bred out of yourselves, they're not bugs in our programming. They're features." Zaxthil's communication device erupted with static and angry clicking. He glanced down to see override codes flashing across the screen. Commander Wachter was attempting to remotely access his systems. The humans noticed his attention shifting to the device. Several of them tensed, preparing for whatever came next. "Your people are coming for you," the medical woman observed. "Yes," Zaxthil replied, making a decision that surprised him as much as it clearly surprised them. "And I need to warn you that they will not show the curiosity I have shown." The override codes stopped flashing as Zaxthil made another choice that went against every protocol in his military programming. He reached into his equipment pack and pulled out a small plasma charge, the kind used for destroying communication equipment to prevent enemy intelligence gathering without hesitation. He placed it against his communicator and activated the charge. The device sparked once and went dark. Its circuits fried beyond repair. The humans stared at him in stunned silence. "That was your only link to your military," the elderly man said slowly. "Yes, they'll consider you a deserter now. Yes." The medical woman stepped closer, her expression intense with an emotion Zaxthil was beginning to recognize as concern for others' well-being. "Why would you cut yourself off from your own people for strangers?" she asked. Zaxthil looked down at his hands, noting for the first time how the crystalline structure of his exoskeleton reflected the warm light from the human settlement. In the sterile environments of Kethran ships, he had never noticed such details. "Because I am beginning to understand that my people may have lost something essential when they decided to become perfect warriors," he said. "And you are no longer strangers." A child's laughter echoed from somewhere within the settlement, followed by the sound of adult voices gently correcting behavior and offering guidance. The sounds created a complex tapestry of life that Zaxel found himself studying like a new form of music. The young man with calloused hands was watching him carefully. "You said they're coming? How long do we have?" Zaxel calculated based on standard Kethrin search protocols and his last known position. 6 hours, perhaps 7. Commander Wachter will send a reconnaissance unit first to determine why I have gone silent. How many? 3 warriors plus support drones. When I fail to report my status, they will assume I have been captured or killed. The main assault force will follow within another 6 hours. The humans exchanged those meaningful glances again, having their silent conversation through expressions and micro-gestures. Zaxel found himself fascinated by this form of communication that relied on understanding each other's emotional states rather than just exchanging information. "We could run," the teenage girl with the injured arm suggested. "Load the transports, take what we can carry, find somewhere else to build." "Where?" the elderly man asked, his voice gentle but firm. "This is the 7th settlement some of us have built. Each time we run, we lose a little more of what makes us who we are. Eventually, there's nothing left worth saving." The medical woman nodded agreement. "Besides, they'll just follow. That's what these raids are about, right?" She looked directly at Zaxel. "Your people are trying to clear this sector of human settlements. The official terminology is pacification operations." Zaxel confirmed, feeling something uncomfortable about the clinical words as he spoke them. "Humans are considered a potentially dangerous species due to your unpredictable emotional responses and your tendency to form resistance movements." "So this isn't just about us?" the young man said. "It's about every human settlement in this region." "Eventually, yes." Another period of silent communication passed between the humans. Zaxel watched their faces, trying to decode the complex interplay of emotions that seemed to guide their decision-making process. Fear was clearly present, but it was balanced by other forces he was only beginning to identify: determination, love for their community, anger at injustice, hope that their actions might matter. Most prominently, he sensed what he thought might be the emotion they called protectiveness, the drive to shield others from harm even at cost to oneself. "We fight," the elderly man announced, though it was clear the decision had been reached collectively through their wordless exchange. "Not because we think we can win, but because someone needs to send a message that humans won't just disappear quietly." "You will all die," Zaxel said bluntly. 3 Kethrin warriors with support drones could eliminate this settlement in minutes. "Probably," the medical woman agreed. "But maybe we can make it expensive for them. Maybe we can record what happens and get the message to other settlements. Maybe we can save a few of our people, especially the children." The teenage girl spoke up again. "And maybe we can show this Kethrin warrior what humans really fight like when we're protecting our families." All eyes turned to Zaxel. He realized they were including him in their planning, treating him as if he had already chosen to stand with them rather than against them. "I do not understand your logic," he said carefully. "You are making decisions that will result in your deaths, and you are doing so while experiencing the fear that should be warning you away from this course of action." The young man smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both sad and fierce. "That's exactly the point. We're not making this choice despite being afraid. We're making it because we're afraid. That makes no sense." "Fear tells us what we value," the medical woman explained patiently. "Right now, I'm terrified of losing my daughter, my friends, the life we've built here. But I'm more terrified of living in a universe where humans just accept being hunted to extinction." Zaxel processed this, comparing it to Kethrin military doctrine. "So your fear serves as a navigation system for your values, something like that, and your willingness to act despite that fear demonstrates your commitment to those values. You're starting to get it," the elderly man said with approval. A new sound reached them from the edge of the settlement. Children playing, their voices bright with joy, despite the adult conversations happening nearby. Someone had made the decision to keep them occupied and happy rather than terrify them with knowledge of approaching danger. Zaxthel turned toward the sound, struck by another realization. You are protecting their emotional state as well as their physical safety? Kids shouldn't have to carry adult fears, the medical woman said simply. They'll be brave when they need to be, but right now they need to be allowed to just be children. Even though honesty about the tactical situation might improve their chances of survival? Some things matter more than survival, the teenage girl said. Her young voice carrying wisdom that Zaxthel found he envied. He stood in the growing dusk, surrounded by beings whose approach to existence challenged everything he thought he understood about strength, wisdom, and the nature of life itself. These humans were preparing to face annihilation, and they were doing it not in spite of their emotions, but because of them. For the first time in his 300 cycles of existence, Zaxthel began to understand what it might feel like to care about something more than his own survival. As night fell over the settlement, Zaxthel found himself in the strange position of being both observer and participant in humanity's preparation for war. The transformation was unlike anything in Kethran military doctrine. Instead of the cold efficiency he expected, the humans moved with a fluid coordination that seemed to emerge from their emotional connections to each other. Parents spoke quietly to their children, not hiding the danger but explaining it in terms the young ones could understand and accept. We're going to play a special hiding game tonight, he heard one mother tell her son. Remember how good you are at staying quiet when we play hide and seek? Tonight that skill is going to help keep everyone safe. The child nodded solemnly, clearly understanding that this was different from their usual games, but trusting his mother's judgment completely. Zaxthel watched as the settlement's defenders organized themselves. They had no formal military structure, no rank insignia, no chain of command that he could identify. Yet somehow they coordinated their efforts with a precision that impressed him. The elderly man, whose name he learned was Marcus, had become something like a tactical coordinator simply because others looked to him for guidance. The medical woman, Dr. Sarah Chun, was setting up treatment areas and organizing evacuation routes for non-combatants. The young man with calloused hands, called Tommy, was checking weapons and ammunition with several other adults. How do you achieve such coordination without formal hierarchy? Zaxthel asked Marcus as they reviewed defensive positions. Marcus paused in his examination of an old hunting rifle to consider the question. Trust, he said simply. We know each other. We've worked together, laughed together, grieved together. When Sarah suggests something medical, we listen because we know she's saved half our lives at one point or another. When Tommy talks about defenses, we pay attention because he's the one who's been maintaining them for 3 years. But what if there is disagreement? What if optimal tactics conflict with individual preferences? Then we talk it out, Dr. Chun said, overhearing the conversation as she passed by with medical supplies. We argue sometimes, sure. But we argue because we all want the same thing, to protect this place and these people. Zaxthel found himself assigned to help Tommy check the settlement's defensive systems. As they worked, Tommy explained each modification and improvement that had been made over the years. This barrier here? We built it after the first raider attack when we lost 3 people, including my sister. Tommy's hands moved efficiently across weapon mounts and sensor arrays, but his voice carried the weight of memory. Dr. Chun suggested the angle to create crossfire zones. Marcus figured out how to camouflage it so it looked like part of the natural landscape. You learn from loss, Zaxthel observed. Every time. Each attack teaches us something new about how to protect what matters. Tommy gestured toward the settlement's heart, where warm light spilled from windows and the sounds of life continued despite the approaching danger. The raiders think they're wearing us down, but they're actually making us stronger, yet you continue to suffer casualties. Tommy's expression grew distant. Yeah, and every loss hurts like hell. But the alternative is giving up, and we've all seen what happens to people who give up. As the hours passed, Zaxthel began to notice something extraordinary happening within himself. The strange sensation in his chest that had begun with watching the injured child was growing stronger, more complex. He found himself studying the faces of the humans around him, learning to read the subtle variations in their emotional expressions. When Dr. Chin's daughter, a girl of perhaps 10 years old, brought him a cup of what the humans called tea, he experienced something entirely new. The child looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only curiosity and the kind of trust that seemed to be given freely until proven wrong. "My mom says you're going to help protect us tonight," she said. Matter-of-faculty.zx Thule looked down at the small cup in his massive hands, then at the child's expectant face. Yes, I believe I am." She smiled, an expression of pure joy that seemed to light up her entire being. "Good. I was worried about the people who are coming. Mom tries to hide it, but I can tell she's scared." "Your mother is very wise to be cautious," Zaxthel replied, surprised by his own gentle tone. "Are you scared?" The child asked with the directness that seemed to be a universal human trait. The question stopped him cold. Scared. Fear. The emotion he had been born without, that he was genetically incapable of experiencing. But as he sat there, holding a cup of tea and talking to a human child while preparing to face his own people in combat, Zaxthel realized that something fundamental had changed within him. His hearts were beating faster than normal. His sensory awareness had heightened to an almost painful degree. His mind kept running through scenarios of all the ways the coming battle could go wrong. All the ways these people he was beginning to care about could be hurt or killed. If this wasn't fear, it was something very much like it. "I think," he said slowly, "I am beginning to understand what scared feels like." The child nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. "It's okay to be scared. Mom says being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid." Before Zaxthel could respond, Tommy's voice called out across the settlement. "Sensors are picking up movement. They're coming." The transformation was immediate and breathtaking. The calm, warm community became a coordinated defense force in minutes. But they did so without losing their essential humanity. Parents kissed their children goodbye and told them they were loved. Friends clasped hands and spoke words of encouragement. Dr. Chun checked and rechecked her medical supplies while quietly humming a song that seemed to calm everyone who heard it. Zaxthel took his position at the settlement's main defensive barrier, an advanced plasma rifle borrowed from his own equipment in his hands. Around him, humans prepared to fight an enemy they couldn't defeat with weapons that were inadequate for the task. And as the first Kethrung reconnaissance drones appeared on the horizon, their cold blue lights cutting through the darkness like mechanical stars, Zaxthel felt the full impact of what the humans had been trying to teach him. Fear wasn't the opposite of courage. Love wasn't the opposite of strength. Emotions weren't weaknesses to be eliminated, but sources of power that could transform ordinary beings into something extraordinary. As the drones swept closer, their sensors probing for defensive positions and weak points, Zaxthel made his final choice. He activated his rifle's targeting system and acquired a lock on the lead drone. For the first time in his existence, he was about to fire on his own people. And for the first time in his existence, he understood exactly why he was willing to do it. The first plasma bolt from Zaxthel's rifle struck the lead reconnaissance drone perfectly center mass, sending it spinning into the ground in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The remaining two drones immediately shifted into combat formation, their own weapons coming online as they identified him as a hostile target. But Zaxthel was no longer thinking like a Kethran warrior. The humans had taught him something new about tactics sometimes. The most effective strategy wasn't the most efficient one. "Marcus," he called out while tracking the second drone. "The drones will relay our defensive positions back to the main force. We need to give them false information." Marcus understood immediately. "Tommy, light up the decoy positions." Across the settlement, carefully prepared false defensive positions erupted in simulated weapons fire and artificial heat signatures. The remaining drones, following their programming to gather intelligence on enemy capabilities, dutifully recorded every fake gun emplacement and phantom defender. Zaxthel disabled the second drone with another precise shot, then turned his attention to the third. But this one was already retreating, carrying its false intelligence back to Commander Wachter. "How long until the main assault?" Dr. Chen asked, appearing at his side with her medical kit ready. 23 minutes, Zaxthel replied after quick calculations. Commander Wachter will analyze the drone data, conclude that you have more defenders and better weapons than you actually possess, and plan accordingly. Will that help us? Zaxthel considered the question, running through tactical scenarios with his enhanced combat algorithms. It will cause them to approach more cautiously, which may give us additional time. But ultimately, we're still outgunned and outnumbered, Tommy finished, joining them at the defensive position. Yes. Then we make every shot count, Marcus said, simply. As they waited for the assault to begin, something unexpected happened. The humans began to sing. It started with Dr. Chun's daughter and the other children, their voices rising in a melody that Zaxthel didn't recognize but somehow understood. One by one, the adult defenders joined in, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to weave through the settlement like visible threads of connection. The song wasn't a battle hymn or a cry for victory. It was something gentler, sadder, more beautiful than any military anthem Zaxthel had ever heard. The words spoke of home, of love that transcends loss, of hope that survives even in darkness. "What is this?" he asked Dr. Chun. "Something my grandmother taught me," she replied, her voice steady even as tears ran down her cheeks. She sang it during the food riots on New Terra, when she thought she might not live to see her children grow up. "Does it serve a tactical purpose?" Dr. Chun smiled through her tears. "It reminds us what we're fighting for. And it tells anyone who hears it that we're not just afraid animals fighting for survival. We're human beings, and we choose to face the darkness with beauty." The song was still echoing across the settlement when the Kethran assault force appeared on the horizon. 3 warriors in full combat armor, accompanied by heavy support drones and automated weapons platforms. Commander Wachter himself led the formation, his distinctive silver and black exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial illumination from his equipment. Zaxthel felt that new emotion fear surge through his system as he recognized the full scope of the force arrayed against them. But alongside the fear came something else, something that burned brighter and stronger. He was angry, not the cold, tactical anger of a Kethran warrior calculating optimal violence, but the fierce, protective anger of someone watching a bully threaten their family. "Attention, human settlement!" Commander Wachter's voice boomed across the area through his external speakers. "You are harboring a Kethran deserter? Surrender him immediately and your deaths will be swift." Marcus stepped forward, his old hunting rifle held across his chest in a position that was clearly non-threatening but equally clearly defiant. "We don't surrender our friends?" he called back. "Friends?" There was genuine confusion in Wachter's voice. "Impossible. Kethran do not form emotional attachments to inferior species." Zaxthel rose from his defensive position, making himself visible to his former commander. "Perhaps that is the problem, Wachter." "Zaxthel." The commander's voice carried a mixture of relief and disappointment. "You have been compromised by prolonged exposure to human emotional contagion. Return to your unit for medical evaluation and correction." "I decline." A long silence followed. When Wachter spoke again, his voice was colder than the vacuum between stars. "Then you will die with them." The attack began with terrifying efficiency. Automated weapons platforms opened fire on the Deka positions while the 3 Kethran warriors advanced under cover of drone strikes. But the humans had learned from every previous battle, and their tactics reflected not just military knowledge but deep understanding of their enemy psychology. Instead of maintaining fixed defensive positions, they flowed through the settlement like water, using their intimate knowledge of every building, every alley, every hidden passage to stay one step ahead of the assault. They didn't fight like Soldiers, they fought like a family, defending their home. Tommy appeared from an unexpected angle, too. Destroy a weapons platform with a jury-rigged explosive device before vanishing again into the maze of buildings. Dr. Chun used her medical training to identify weak points in Kethran armor, calling out targeting information to other defenders. Marcus coordinated the defense with hand signals and whispered words, his calm presence keeping everyone focused despite the chaos, and through it all, Zaxthel found himself fighting not as a Kethran warrior, but as something new. Each shot he fired was guided not just by tactical calculations, but by protective instinct. When Dr. Chun's position came under fire, he threw himself into the line of attack without hesitation. When Tommy was pinned down by drone fire, Zaxthel exposed himself to enemy weapons to provide covering. He was learning what it meant to fight for something rather than merely against something, but courage and determination could only accomplish so much against superior firepower. One by one, the human defenders fell. Tommy took a plasma bolt while protecting the children's hiding place. Marcus was caught by shrapnel from an exploding weapons platform. Dr. Chun was struck while treating wounded defenders. As Zaxthel knelt beside Dr. Chun's still form, cradling her head while her daughter cried nearby, he felt the full weight of what the humans had given him. Not just the capacity for fear, but the ability to love, to grieve, to hope. To be truly alive. Commander Vakter's voice echoed across the settlement as the last defensive positions fell. Zaxthel, surrender yourself and we will allow the surviving humans to flee. Continue this resistance and they will all die. Zaxthel looked around at the faces watching him, dirty, bloodied, terrified, but unbroken. These people had taught him what it meant to be more than just a weapon. Now they were asking him to choose between his own survival and theirs for a Kethran warrior. It should have been an easy calculation. For the being Zaxthel had become, it was the easiest choice he had ever made. Zaxthel stood slowly, his plasma rifle hanging loose in his hands. Around him, the surviving humans watched with expressions that held no expectation, no demand for sacrifice. They had already given him the greatest gift possible, the knowledge of what it meant to choose who you wanted to. I surrender, he called out to Commander Vakter, but as he began to walk toward the Kethran assault force, Dr. Chun's daughter broke free from the group of survivors and ran to his side. Her small hand slipped into his massive armored one, and she looked up at him with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. You don't have to do this alone, she whispered. One by one, the surviving humans stepped forward. Marcus, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch but still upright. Tommy, his arm in a sling but his resolve unshaken. The teenage girl whose mother had died defending the settlement, Dr. Chun, somehow still breathing despite her injuries. Supported by two other survivors, they formed a loose circle around Zaxthel, not to protect him physically but to show Commander Vakter that he was not alone. Fascinating, Vakter's voice carried across the distance between them. The emotional contagion has spread to the entire population. They are willing to die for a being who is not even their own species. That is correct, Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. Why? It was Dr. Chun who answered, her voice weak but steady. Because he became one of us. Not by birth, not by genetics, but by choice. He learned to care about something more than his own survival. Commander Vakter was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something Zaxthel had never heard before: uncertainty. This serves no tactical purpose. There is no logical benefit to this behavior. Logic isn't everything, the little girl said, still holding Zaxthel's hand. Sometimes the most important things don't make sense on paper. Zaxthel felt something shift in his perception of the moment. The humans weren't just offering to die with him, they were teaching Commander Vakter the same lesson they had taught him. They were demonstrating that there were ways of being strong that had nothing to do with weapons or armor or military efficiency. Commander, Zaxthel called out. I request permission to address the unit. Speak. Zaxthel activated his armor's external speakers. ensuring his words would carry to all three warriors and their support systems. For 300 cycles, I believed that fear was weakness, that emotional attachment was inefficiency, that the highest form of existence was to be a perfect weapon. He looked down at the small hand in his, then at the faces of the humans surrounding him. I was wrong. You have been compromised by alien psychology, one of the other warriors responded. Your judgment is no longer reliable. My judgment has never been more clear, Zaxthil replied. These beings taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but action taken despite fear. That strength is not the ability to destroy, but the willingness to protect. That the purpose of existence is not efficiency, but connection. He gestured to the humans around him. Look at them, Commander. They know they cannot defeat us. They know that their resistance will result in their deaths. Yet they choose to stand together rather than abandon each other. Tell me, when was the last time any Kethran chose to die for someone else? Another silence stretched across the battlefield. Zaxthil could see his former commander's posture shifting, uncertainty creeping into movements that had always been perfectly controlled. Our ancestors eliminated these emotions for good reason, Vakter said finally. Did they? Dr. Chun asked, her medical training allowing her to read Kethran body language as well as human. Or did they eliminate them because they were afraid of what those emotions might ask them to become? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Zaxthil watched Commander Vakter's reaction, seeing the micro-expressions that indicated deep processing of unexpected data. The Kethran Empire spans 300 systems, Vakter said slowly. We have achieved perfect military efficiency, perfect tactical coordination, perfect discipline. And what has that perfection cost you? Marcus asked quietly. For the first time in his memory, Zaxthil saw a Kethran warrior hesitate. Commander Vakter's weapon lowered slightly, and his posture shifted from aggressive readiness to something more contemplative. I do not understand the question. When was the last time you felt joy? Dr. Chin's daughter asked with the simple directness of childhood. When was the last time you laughed or cried or felt proud of someone you loved? Those emotions serve no military purpose. No, the little girl agreed. But they serve a living purpose. Zaxthil felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Everything he had learned from these humans, everything they had taught him about the value of choice and connection and hope, came down to this single conversation in the ruins of their settlement. Commander, he said carefully, I formally request that you scan my biometric data. For what purpose? To determine whether the changes in my psychological profile have improved or degraded my overall performance capabilities. There was a pause while Vakter's equipment ran the scans. When he spoke again, his voice carried surprise. Your reaction time has improved by 12%. Your tactical awareness has increased by 8%. Your problem-solving efficiency has increased by 23%. The emotions these humans taught me to feel have made me a better warrior, Zaxthil explained. But more than that, they have made me a better being. They have given me something worth fighting for beyond simple adherence to orders. Commander Vakter stood motionless for several minutes, processing data that challenged everything his species had believed for millennia. When he finally spoke, his words changed the course of both their civilizations. Warriors, stand down. Withdraw to minimum safe distance and maintain defensive perimeter only. The other two Kethran warriors looked at their commander in confusion, but they followed orders. Vakter approached the group slowly, his weapons powered down but not holstered. When he reached them, he studied the faces of the humans with an intensity that reminded Zaxthil of his own first encounter with these remarkable beings. I would like to understand, Vakter said simply. Dr. Chun smiled, despite her injuries and exhaustion. Understanding is where it all begins. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon, Zaxthil looked around at the scene developing before him. Commander Vakter was sitting on a piece of rubble, listening intently as Marcus explained the concept of community. The other Kethran warriors had cautiously approached and were watching with the same fascination Zaxthel had felt during his own introduction to human emotion. Dr. Chun's daughter had somehow convinced one of the massive alien warriors to help her search for her toy that had been lost during the battle, and the sight of a being designed for perfect warfare carefully moving debris to help a small child was almost surreal in its beauty. The settlement was damaged. Many of its people were wounded, and the future remained uncertain. But something new had begun in the ruins of what was supposed to have been a simple military operation. The Kethran were learning what it meant to be alive, and in the growing light of morning, as humans and aliens worked together to tend wounds and rebuild what could be saved, Zaxthel understood that he had found something worth more than all the military victories in the galaxy. He had found his humanity.